Hi everyone, I'm Dan from JazzComposersPresent.com, an online space where composers, musicians, and listeners come together to celebrate the music we love. I'm joined today by Anna Weber, flutist, saxophonist, composer, and bandleader. Anna is here to show us how to incorporate extended techniques into compositions.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to Jazz Composers Present for inviting me to talk a little bit about my musical world. So today I'm going to talk about extended techniques, what they are, why I think they're interesting, and some ideas to start incorporating them in your own work. So what are extended techniques? That term is pretty broad. It basically means any non-traditional way of producing sound on an instrument. On my instruments, which are the saxophone and flute, some extended techniques would be slap tongue, air sounds, flutter tongue, false fingerings, or any sort of microtonality, and many others. We use the term extended techniques, but it's actually something of a misnomer, as it labels these sounds as abnormal, but actually the result of our instruments behaving how they're naturally inclined to behave. I find extended techniques interesting because they distinguish one instrument from the next in a really special way. And in some cases, these sounds are more idiomatic to the instruments than the 12 equal-tempered pitches we generally use in the Western world. So my first piece of advice, if you're interested in incorporating extended techniques in your work, is to start with yourself. My own interest in using extended techniques as a composer came from a period where I was reflecting on my compositional language versus my improvisational language. As an improviser, I was very interested in the saxophone and flute as creators of sound and not just pitch. But then I would sit down to write and would default to pretty traditional language, 12 pitches, cool melodies, cool harmonies, cool rhythms. I realized that if timbre was important to me as an improviser, I should figure out how to also use it in my compositions, because it's important to me to have a through line for myself as a player to myself as a composer. So I want to play a little bit of my piece Idiom I, which is from an album that's also called Idiom. So the first question that usually comes up for this piece is, how did I come up with the sounds? Well, using false fingerings on the flute was something that I'd worked on a lot as an improviser, and so I used improvisation to start this piece. I played around with various microtonal finger patterns, and when I found a pattern that I liked, I wrote it down. I came up with probably a dozen or so of those, and I tried to figure out a way to organize them in a meaningful way. So if you're trying to use extended techniques when you're composing, start with what you can do. What sounds do you make when you're improvising? And can you figure out a way of getting those down on paper? And that brings me to the second question that often comes up for Idiom I, which is, how did I figure out how to notate this? So for much of the extended technique notation that I use, I figured out how to write it down by studying scores of 20th and 21st century classical compositions. But that's not the only way forward. You could also use words. Many jazz musicians, for example, aren't super versed in reading new music style extended technique notation. And super complex notation can be a hindrance more than an aid, even if it looks cool. But descriptive language can really help in getting your ideas across. So this is a piece I wrote for a large ensemble where I invented a lot of notation for the band. Here you can see I use graphics, which can be super effective. So that's just a shape that the people are playing that's down on the bottom of that page. And if you flip to the second page, that cloud of shapes actually translates to note heads. Note heads can be a really good way of describing sounds in a shorthand that can be easily memorized by someone playing your music. My one piece of advice for this is to try to be consistent and specific. So don't use the same shape for slap tongue, for example, that you then later use for an air sound, because that gets confusing for the players. The next step for incorporating extended techniques into your compositions is to write them for other people. And for this, I want to play a little part of another piece of mine. This one's called Cora 2, and it's from my album Clockwise. I wanted to play this piece because with it, I moved past writing extended techniques just for myself, and I wrote them for other people in the band too. My best advice for this is to first research the instruments you're writing for. By this, I mean more than just their ranges. Figure out how the instruments work and learn about the types of sounds that are possible on them. There are lots of books out there that detail the different kinds of extended technique sounds that are possible in most instruments. Next, interview the people that you're writing for. For me, this is the most useful step because it goes beyond what an instrument can do to what can this specific person do. And that varies wildly between people. Interviewing the people you're writing for, even if you feel like you know that person well, can be huge, and I guarantee that you'll learn a lot from this process. When I wrote Cora 2, after interviewing all the people in my band, I made a list of all the extended technique sounds that I wanted to use on each of these various instruments. And then I wrote out different orchestrations of those, and that became the building blocks of that piece. To conclude this mini lesson, I have one more thought, and that's that when I started writing using extended techniques, I was scared of writing music using timbre as a main organizational element. It felt new to me, and I wasn't sure if I'd write anything good because I had these habits that I knew worked for me compositionally. But I learned through this process that timbre can be just as important as any other element of music, equal to melody, to harmony, and to rhythm. And I'm really glad I stuck with it, because I don't think it's possible to move your music forward if you stay comfortable.
Thanks for watching today's mini lesson. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Drop any questions, comments, or suggestions for future videos in the comment section down below. To watch our full-length events and participate in live Q&As with our presenting artists, head over to jazzcomposerspresent.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.